Please.
Thank you and good evening, everyone. I hope you can still hear me. Before I speak or say anything, there's something that I have to get off my chest before we get to the business, the issue. I don't know about you, but when I first received the news, I cried. I couldn't hold myself because it was very sad. And I haven't.
Hello, have we lost him?
I suspect so.
Oh, there he's back now, but now we can't hear him now.
Hi.
Hello.
Hello. Can I start now?
Yes, please start.
I was saying earlier that I don't know. There are two things I will get into the key of the program. And I'm saying so because earlier on I was smiling, but I cannot smile because when I first read the news, the sad news, that Fr.Albert, the activist, the theologian, the thinker, passed away, I cried. And I haven't cried for many, many years. The last time I cried was when my mom passed away, my dad passed away, and my late brother, Dikeni, the poet, who sadly passed away as well. But to them, it was drops of tears. But for Father Albert, it was a bucket of tears. So I thought I should just convey that because this is a very, very important moment. It's a moment of grief, but it's also a moment of celebrating a life of a giant like his.
Comrade Leslie, we can't hear you now. I don't know if are you muted or whatever.
Leslie.
Leslie, we can't hear you. We can see your mouth moving. We cannot hear a word. So you must be muted. Hey.
Can somebody phone him?
I think he switched off his phone earlier, and I don't think he's aware that he's muted. Someone else may have muted him while muting everybody else.
While we're waiting for Leslie to come back on, should we not go on to Archbishop T.Mokgoba so we can keep moving? And then I'm sure at some point Leslie will come back on.
Thank you. Is my video coming through, fellow?
Yes.
Okay. I was asked to offer a prayer, and perhaps before I offer a prayer, whilst Leslie is coming on, just a few brief personal anecdotes before a prayer. When I was an Anglican Student Society member in the 1980s, one of the seminal texts we read and studied was Albert Nolan's Jesus Before Christianity. He was subsequently invited to address the annual conference of the Anglican Student Federation, and my life and those of many others was transformed. At Wits, the Anglican Student Society worked closely with YCS, and I recall going frequently with Jabu Ngwenya in his red car to the YCS offices in Mayfair. The good thing about going to those busy offices was that their photocopier at least worked, so we were able to print and collect pamphlets on time for when we needed them. Jesus Before Christianity inspired us to think anew about what the kingdom of God is, and particularly about how to make that kingdom on earth come on earth as it is in heaven. The book, with the publications of the Institute of Contextual Theology, the speeches and the writings, and my experience at the Jabulani Stadium rally celebrating Desmond Tutu's Nobel Peace Prize, all combined to touch something deep in my heart. As a result, studying science and being content with staying at home was no longer an option for me. I became quietly involved in church and varsity until the then Bishop Tutu discerned a vocation to the ordained priesthood and sent me to seminary in Makanda. Albert Nolan wrote and spoke with a special clarity, at least for me, and his message demanded a personal response too. He wrote with depth, he was profound in his teaching, his simplicity and uncluttered nature were palpable, but they were the fruits of deep contemplation. He was a true African. He did not distinguish between matter and spirit, as God is in all. Love of God and love of neighbor were two sides of the same coin for him. So recounting just briefly his Anglican Student Federation talks, Father Nolan challenged us to read the Bible, and it was no surprise to us when he became the first editor of a Challenge magazine. He wanted this magazine to be sold in every shop and every taxi. He did not believe that the faith should only be understood by the elite and the educated in grand institutions or parishes. For him, everyone who asked questions about God was a theologian. His final book, Jesus Today, dealt with all the major challenges that humanity faces, including climate change and climate justice. These challenges should be included as urgent struggles for today, dear friends. They call for our collective action. And so as we celebrate a life well lived by Albert Nolan, we must join communities in fighting for proper water supplies, for environmental justice, for cancellation of sovereign debt, which hurts the poorest, and for an end to the war on Ukraine. Perhaps his life and example call us to hold a South African conversation or convention to reflect once again on where we are today, on what our vision is for the future, and on how we heal our wounded psyches at this crisis moment in our history. And so I want to say, go well, Son of God, Son of the Church, Son of the people. You have run your race, you have kept the faith, and you have passed the baton on to us. May you rest in God's eternal peace. Please pray for us as you take your place amongst the cloud of witnesses. And so let us pray. Loving God, thank you for giving us your servant, Albert Nolan. Thank you for his many gifts. Thank you for his rich legacy. Be with us now and empower us to live the life that Albert would encourage us to live, a life of simplicity, yet a life of courage to name the evil of corruption, a life which feels the pain of poor Black youths with no access to opportunities. We ask these prayers through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
Yes, colleagues, I'm back again. I think then the next speaker is going to be Mr. Tshediso Motona, a former member of Cosas. Hello? Hello? Yeah, yes.
Greetings to esteemed participants at this memorial of a truly special person. Greetings to the clergy, friends and family of Father Nolan, comrades, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for the honor for our generation to pay tribute to Father Albert Nolan. I encountered him, and he would say we should call him Albert. I encountered him in the context of the re-emergence of organized activism in the late 1970s into the 80s after the murderous repression of the 1976 uprisings and after. As part of the youth who came from that experience, who had seen that we have agency and power in mass action, we were an angry lot, hungry for weapons to overthrow the apartheid regime. Now, some of us did go and get hardware, weapons, hardware, but others stayed here looking for methods, looking for strategies and tactics about how to liberate ourselves. I don't know if it was by divine design that we encountered Albert. He had what we were hungry for. He was
Tshediso, you are muted. sabotage. Yo,
I don't know. I don't know where I was, but I was at the point where I was saying Albert's grounding of our struggle for freedom in God and in theology proved profoundly empowering and lasting, with its turning point and manifesto later to be the Kairos document, which he co-authored with others such as the Reverend Frank Chikani, Bears Nodier, Father Krishna, Sister Bernard Ngube, and to name some. This was a prolific period, abundant in ideas and courage in the face of mortal danger. The impact of the See, Judge, Act method that Albert taught us was life-changing for me. It changed my life forever. And this must have been the case for our cohort of that time. He helped convert our raw anger into intellectual and organizational capital that we deployed in mass mobilization, not only of youth and students, but of communities at large, thereby enabling widespread emergence of Gramsci's organic intellectuals who kept the masses politically engaged and active. Which leads me to Albert's intellectualism. Although firmly rooted in theology, Albert was an anti-dogmatist. He was anti-orthodox because he introduced us to Marxism, as Cecil Souls reminded me. Marxism as a source of analysis and strategy. In summary, my lasting lesson from Albert is simple and yet as relevant today as ever. And it is about that it's not enough merely to possess agency to act, but the key is in the quality of that agency. And that requires deliberate interventions at the level of consciousness, at the intellectual and ideological level. Today, in the movement of which Albert was integral, I think we can tell apart those who simply possess agency and those who have grooming and quality. Albert was deep but gentle in speech, in contrast to today's noise from empty vessels. Albert is one of those in the struggle whose thinking and deeds raise the moral and intellectual bar, but his signature is emphatically unique, and so is his legacy. If selflessness, servanthood was a person, that person would be Albert. He was a giant, as Leslie said at the beginning, a dynamite, but in remarkably humble packaging. The reality is that in the context of present-day society and politics, Albert signifies the measure of moral poverty, measure of frightening disconnect of leaders from people and their suffering, the tyranny of things material over virtue, the deficit of conscience and commitment to the truth of what needs to be done for full liberation in South Africa. Albert is gone, but his ideas have yet to be fulfilled. And that's the challenge he leaves us with. Go well, Father Nolan, our dear comrade and friend, and long live. I thank you.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We now, colleagues, are going to have our next speaker, Miss Marylin Aitken from the GRAIL.
Good evening, everyone. Please forgive me. I'm not going to show my face because my internet is a bit unstable. Thank you to the organizers for inviting me to speak about Albert. It is such a huge honor. Funerals were very important meeting and communicating spaces during the apartheid struggle. In those days, they were places to mourn the loss of lives ended too early by the agents of the apartheid regime. They were spaces to encourage one another to continue despite all odds. Today it is different, and I greet the many of you that I haven't seen since those dark days. As we all come here to celebrate Albert's long and very fruitful life. There are two Albert stories from the struggle days that I would like to begin with. The first happened early one Friday morning in December 1981 at the GRAIL Centre at Tulloch Avenue, Johannesburg. Our housekeeper, Dora Mashishi, woke us with the news that the security police had blocked our entrance. We phoned around and found that they were already searching Bays Nadir and Wolfram Kistner's houses. We had 4 hours to pack anything they would regard as subversive into bags and throw them over the wall into our neighbor's garden. The security police eventually arrived at 9:30 and demanded to see Mr. Nolan's. Pam Farrow, who was very uptight by that time, yelled at them, "There's no Mr. Nolan's here." So they decided that she must be the prime suspect. They did a very thorough search of her room, even reading her private correspondence. The Dominican house in Mayfair did not get searched. Perhaps the security police were too afraid of the Pope or Archbishop Hurley to touch the Dominicans. Was their asking for Mr. Nolan's perhaps their oblique way of letting Albert know that they had him in their sights nonetheless? The second story concerns the launching of the United Democratic Front. Early in 1983, Bays Nadir called Albert, Smangalisa Mkatra and me to a secret meeting to work on a budget for the launching of the UDF. I worked for the Catholic Bishops' Justice and Peace Commission at that time and knew many funders. The budget found its way to Europe, and a few weeks later, the funds arrived in the highest denomination Dutch guilder notes, hidden in the socks of an activist who had arrived from London that morning. The UDF launch in August in Mitchell's Plain, Cape Town, was a vibrant, huge success. And I suspect that the person who gathered the funds together in London is with us tonight. But the part of Albert's life that I believe has most relevance for our present times is what I would like to concentrate on. Sometime near the turn of the century, Albert traveled to the USA to study with Thomas Berry, who was passionate about the theology of creation, evolution, ecology, and respect for the earth. He had written many books on the subject. Albert met too with Brian Swim and his fellow Dominican Miriam Therese McGillis, all of whom were disciples of the Jesuit theologian and paleontologist Teilhard de Chardin. Albert embraced enthusiastically this new way of thinking and came home to write Jesus Today, A Spirituality of Radical Freedom, published in 2006. He talked about his new insights in the chapters entitled One with God, excuse me, in the chapters entitled One with God, One with Ourselves, One with Other Human Beings, and One with the Universe. The Kairos moment facing us today is the twin threats of climate change and the terrifying 69% loss of biodiversity, the planet's life support systems. We might do well to reread and study Jesus Today, as well as a talk Albert gave on the theology of creation, to give us guidelines on how to address these twin crises. Africa, lying as it does, mainly within the tropics, will suffer and is already suffering more than other continents. As Nigerian climate activist Nimo Bassi has warned, we are going to fry in Africa as the temperatures rise way above the safe 1.5 degrees since pre-industrial times. As the UNFCCC COP27 approaches next month in Egypt, many of our political leaders in Africa are way out of step with climate science as they hold grimly onto fossil fuels, gas, oil, and especially coal, while the rest of the world is moving fast into renewable energy, knowing that the planet shares the same atmosphere and that what happens in one part of the world affects the whole. What Africa needs is strong, informed political and civil society leadership, working together to force the global north to pay its climate debt to our continent by fast-tracking finance for renewable energy and the loss and damage we have already suffered. In his letter Laudato Si, Pope Francis has given us some of the theology we need to understand 1.5 degrees and 350 parts per million. We Africans need to contextualize this theology and develop the necessary spirituality that incorporates the three principles of the universe: interiority, differentiation, and communion. We need to learn to obey the divine law of limits, which human beings have so grossly transgressed over the past 100 years in particular, and how to make an option for the poor, whom climate change is impacting most. It's not possible to talk about Albert in the context of climate change without paying tribute to his fellow Dominican mentor, the late Finbar Sinnott, the man who influenced the lives of so many of us too. In the 1970s, Finbar prophetically denounced air travel and the use of cars, decades before teenage girl prophet and climate guru Greta Thunberg was born at 375 parts per million. I find it telling how many past activists are now involved in climate change or biodiversity work, as renewable energy business people, as a leader of a university energy institute, as a support agent for indigenous people whose land and heritage, and restoring ecosystem services. I have hardly seen Albert during this time, and I regret not making it a priority to talk with him about the kairos of our present decade. Hamba kahle, Albert, as you join our ancestors. Tsamaya hantle along the evolutionary path. You have taught us well. We will not let you down. Lala Salama. Thank you.
Thank you. Without further delay, colleagues, our next speaker is going to be Mr. Mandla Nkomfe, a member of the Màss Democratic Movement, activist, who with many of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Comrade Leslie, friends and comrades, the clergy and the family. Mine is really impressions that I formed in relation to Comrade Father Albert Nolan. Let me say that I'm honored to have been invited to talk at this memorial service. It is indeed intimidating for me to speak on an occasion that celebrates the life and times of such a towering intellectual, activist, and persons of profound faith. To many of us, Father Albert Nolan was not just a faith leader, but a teacher, a revolutionary, instigator of radical thought and action. In him, we got perspective on what we were doing. This perspective lifted us from the harsh realities of life under apartheid. For him, the purpose of life is not mere survival, but is meant to be lived. He gave our struggle its moral and political integrity. I come from the generation of activists in the Congress of South African Students, Cosas, Azanian Student Organization, Azaso, Soweto Youth Congress, SOICO, and the rest of the youth movement. As part of the progressive youth organizations, we worked closely with the Young Christian Students, YCS, as well as the Young Christian Workers. For Nolan's influence, Father Albert's influence extended to affiliates of the UDF and the rest of the MDM. In working with these organizations, I must say we were exposed to yet another intellectual and organizational tradition of the liberation movement. For Father Albert Nolan featured prominently in our discussions, teaching us on how we could analyze our circumstances and act to change for the better. Through the YCS and YWC, Young Workers, Christian Workers, Father Nolan, in a very interesting way, unleashed an army of activists into the broader mass democratic movement. In no time, we also became Nolan's people. So, program director, this new way of thinking, informed by contextual theology, emphasized the link between theory and practice, and was indeed aligned with yet another tradition, which insisted that it is not enough to analyze history, but the point is to change it. The analytical frame of See, Judge, Act helped us to become better activists. Informed by this approach, we could interact with our communities, we could build strong organizations, we could sustain a sense of deep activist base for struggle. So to us, Father Nolan was not just a thought leader, but guided us in the actual struggles of our communities. He was in the trenches, in the different areas of the struggles. And as many have alluded, Father Albert Nolan, in many ways, was a movement builder. He believed that change could only come when people are organized in political and social action. So very importantly, for him, organization was the live wire for any activity. He created possibilities for all patriots to stand on a common platform for change. He taught us that we should always strive to deepen our commonalities as well as convergences in social action. The emergence of Challenge magazine, particularly in the area of battle of ideas, and most importantly, the Kairos document, in my view, cemented the role and place of faith-based organizations within the mass democratic movement. The import of the Kairos document to us was the extent to which it galvanized the masses of our people who were of Christian faith into political action. It exposed the hypocrisy of existing and dominant church positions. It allowed people to have a frame for evaluating apartheid. It helped the MDM to extend its social base or its reach to Christian communities. and facilitate their involvement in the struggle against apartheid. Another theme I want to come to is a theme that Father Albert Nolan captures this very well in his book, which is called Hope in the Age of Despair. And that theme is the signs of the times. Father Nolan made a big impression on how I see and approach the world we live in. In this regard, he insisted that we must always have the ability to read what he called the signs of the time. Drawing from his study of the role of the prophets and their role in ancient times, he came up with the notions of speaking out, of speaking before, and of speaking for. The idea that you could speak out against everything wrong, against all the assumptions and accepted norms of behavior. That their commentary as prophets was characterized by criticisms or speaking out, not just the country's enemies, but also the country itself. So it was through Father Nolan that as young people, we could again be fearless, we could be confident, and we could speak out boldly regardless of consequences. Father Nolan's idea of the signs of time suggests that we could appeal for social change in the light of what we see and what we see as the signs of the time. This was not an abstract, timeless proposition. It is something that they observe, they interpret their situation very well, particularly their historic events, the political and social events. So it's something that is real. So according to Father Nolan, this obligates us to interpret the new set of times, of signs in our times. Father Nolan brought perspectives or understanding of the logic and workings of the apartheid system. He helped us to correctly read the signs of the time. And for us, let me come back to asking the question, what are the signs of our time? And this is something that he talks about in his book. In my view, our country is going through a difficult phase in its development. It is indeed in an inflection point. We can slide back or rise to the occasion by regenerating, renewing, and changing the way our country is led and governed. The national mood is one of despondency and hopelessness, a national spirit that is negative and insecure. It is faced with weak political, economic, and social institutions. This has resulted in much of our infrastructure not working, whether it could be rail, it could be water, it could be hospitals, it could be electricity, amongst others. Social cohesion is weakening, particularly the collapse of our non-racial project. Our times are characterized by increased gender-based violence, femicides, the killing of children. There is an increase in the criminality of all sorts, the levels of poverty and unemployment, etc. But I want to end this part by coming back to what Comrade Tshediso was saying, and that is the notion of agency, that we need to recover our own agency, the agency of our people. But the other question I'm asking is, where are the prophets of our times? Who will interpret the signs of our times? So that's a challenge that I'm putting to you. When our people need hope in the age of despair, our people are left to fend for themselves. Most of us are living in relative comfort of our homes. Father Nolan's passing presents us with the challenge to observe, to understand and interpret the signs of our times. We must continue to implement the methodology of see, judge, act. As activists, we cannot be despondent. For if we do that, we will betray Father Nolan's teachings. So what is to be done, colleagues? in my view, notwithstanding the current pressing challenges that we have, we should sustain our Northern Star, which is the original promise that we had in our struggle of a better life for all. We must reimagine public purpose. We must recover our core values and repurpose our politics. Reimagine the future of politics and political culture. And most importantly, because I see quite a lot of activists and comrades I've not seen for a long time, is to sustain and build a very strong activist space. So the key question that I want to leave you with is, what can citizens and civil society organizations do to defend and renew our democracy? What changes are necessary for government to ensure democratic institutions are more resilient and durable? How can we ensure that the state's performance improves so that we don't have a collapsing rail system, we don't have a collapsing health system, etc.? Can we create a more conducive working environment for public servants committed to building state capacity and genuinely serve the public? Because the situation now is characterized by fear, and whistleblowers are not coming forward. And lastly, how can we build people's power in our democracy? Because change will not only come through political parties, but it comes through a whole range of organizations that yourselves belong to and that you sustained our struggle generally. So Father Nolan's teachings therefore obliges us to continue to speak out, to be courageous, to be fearless, confident, and speak out boldly regardless of consequences. It is through organization that we can realize our higher purpose of better life for all. So to Father Nolan, my message, and to all of us here, is that your ideas will continue to inspire us to do more for the common good. Thank you very much.
Without further delay, because we're running out of time, the next speaker is Mr. Horst Kleinschmidt, a member again of the Màss Democratic Movement, an activist who also worked very closely with Albert over the years. Hello. Hello. They can hear you. Yeah. As I said, our next speaker is Mr. Horst Kleinschmidt, a member of the Màss Democratic Movement, an activist who worked very closely over the years with Albert.
It looks like it's not here.
Got a technical problem there. Can someone assist Mr. Horst? Yeah, he needs to be unmuted, colleagues. Let's go to the link in your WhatsApp. See him. No, he says he needs to be unmuted. I saw the message. Yeah. Hello? Yeah. Okay. They are seeing. Hello, are we together? Hello? I was unmuted.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah. Can I say a few things in the meantime? Whilst because I was a bit censored by technology, there are two things I'm going to say. Is that, colleagues, we can interpret, give meaning to the social life and historical life of Albert. But there's always one thing that stands out in Albert, and I think I'm hearing this from everyone who's been speaking, is that Albert was a man who never seek to gain face, nor seek to lose face. He was always there. He was always that person. His humbleness is something that I personally, and I think many of us will agree, have learned a lot from. Despite that, the other aspect and character that he had was his ability to be pedagogical. He had a different form of pedagogy that all of us, I think, can agree to. You would never find in any institution of learning. And I've been through. But his method, I think, even went beyond the works of Paulo Freire, and such was Albert. I just thought I should say that. Is our speaker now available? Is Mr. Horst Kleinschmidt with us? Otherwise, I have a lot more to say about Albert, but I have to mute myself.
Leslie, it's Stephen. Yeah, Horst is still muted, so he can't speak. So maybe we should move on to the next person.
Okay, we'll then move on to the next speaker. That speaker will be Mr. Father Mike Deeb, a former member of the Young Christian Student, a colleague and a friend, who also worked for many, many years with Albert.
Good evening, and many thanks for this opportunity to say a few words about Albert. I've been asked to speak a little bit about Albert's role with the student movement in general, and I'm very happy to do that because I started my own period as a student at the time. Oh dear. When Albert was starting, and we can also give testimony to the fact Christians, especially Catholics, but students in general. He's, as we've already heard from our friends from Cosas and other student movements. So Albert began his time with students as the university chaplain of Stellenbosch University. And he began there in the late 60s, early 70s. And he was working very closely, interestingly, with someone who influenced him a lot was Kali Hanekom, who's the older brother of Derek.
I think he's muted. We need to unmute him.
He can unmute himself.
Or he must unmute himself.
No, actually, we can hear him. I think it's another issue.
Hello, Mark, we can't hear you.
Others say they can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, I can hear you, Mike.
Don't mind, I will continue.
Continue, Mike. We can hear you.
We can hear you. Continue.
Okay, so I was saying that Albert began in Stellenbosch University as the chaplain, and he was very influenced by Kali Hanekom, who was a big part of his politicization, of Albert's politicization. Albert often acknowledged that. And it was in that period, in 1972, that Albert started attending the national conferences of the National Catholic Federation of Students, NCFS, which is the predecessor of what's today ACT, or the Association of Catholic Tertiary Students. And it was at the 72 conference that Albert gave a series of talks on that man, Jesus. And those are the talks that gave rise eventually to his book, Jesus Before Christianity. And that conference had a dramatic impact on all the students that were there. And I wasn't there, I only arrived a year later. But everyone gave testimony to the fact that things were never the same after that. Everyone was talking about this understanding of Jesus that was in some ways was new for almost all of them, and especially for me when I came on the scene. So Albert continued to speak at all these NCFS conferences for many years, because he became the national chaplain of NCFS in 1973, and he continued with that until 1980. And I was privileged to work with him very closely in all those years. And in those conferences, what he always used to speak about was understanding of Jesus, that we see in Jesus Before Christianity, and the concept of the kingdom of God, which was something that he emphasized a lot, and the values of the kingdom, which became the basis for the way in which all the students that were inspired by him were able to follow their own theological development through a reflection on this understanding of the kingdom. So Albert had a dramatic effect on all of us already at that stage. It was also the period when he started that the black students all left NCFS. It was the time of black consciousness, and those black students who were in left, and it took some years before they could form their own organization. But Albert was the chaplain at the time, and he was able to accompany, together with Kali especially, who was the president of the NCFS at that time, into making contact, having meetings with all the black students. And these meetings resulted in the black students coming together and forming CASA. And Albert was also the national chaplain for them for the next 4 years or so. In that time, Albert learned a lot from all those encounters, especially with the black students. And with the split off of CASA from NCFS, he realized, along with the rest of us in NCFS, that if we wanted to be relevant in this situation, as white students, we had to be part of the change in South Africa. We had to be actively involved in some sort of change. And the other thing we realized, that to be able to be involved in change wasn't just an intellectual or theoretical issue. We needed a methodology that could enable us to do this. And so there was a lot of discussion, and that Albert was integral to, about what sort of methodology would work. We already knew about the young Christian workers who were using the C Judge Act method. Kali went to work with them, and Albert went off to Lima in Peru to an international conference of the International Movement of Catholic Students, IMCS, to which NCFS was affiliated. And there he encountered the C Judge and Act method used by the YCS, which was the same, obviously, as the YCW. And he encountered liberation theologians like Gustavo Gutierrez. And when he came back, immediately we started developing groups. He wrote a document on what was C Judge Act, and groups were started in almost all the universities affiliated to NCFS at that point. So groups started, and after a year or two of that operation, we linked up with the YCS groups that were linked to YCW, all the schools groups, and we formed YCS in 1977. And Albert was the national chaplain of YCS as well. And the important thing about him at that point was that he showed how one could be involved in the struggle and be a Christian at the same time. And this was a very key element, especially when YCS started spreading into black schools, where we found that so many of the students who were joining YCS, because it was already involved in the struggle, for them it was often the first experience and first positive experience of church. And this had a big impact on all the students. This way in which I was able to to talk about theology
yes, I'm
and
busy
God
watching this.
and
I'm busy listening to Mike D.
Marylin, we can hear you. Won't you mute yourself? Thank you. So those are Albert's, and he continued to be the national chaplain of YCS until 1984. So that was his dominant experience to students, but of course he continued to be available to students all thereafter. Even someone like Leslie Dikeni, who became the national coordinator of YCS, I think after that period, he got close to Albert, even though Albert wasn't the national chaplain anymore, but he was always available. What can we say about Albert? Is that the important thing about him is that he provided the theological basis for the student movements. But I must say that it wasn't only these Christian movements, these Catholic movements. It wasn't, and he had an impact on other Christian movements like Sukkah, and he provided this theological basis. But the important thing was that he always acknowledged how much he was learning from the students. He was an excellent listener, and he never ceased to talk about how much he was learning. We could see often his own evolution and how he was learning. So, and he managed to take this experience into ICT when he was part of forming that Institute for Contextual Theology, and he also through that encountered all the other student groups and also many student leaders of Cosas, of Azazu, that were very integrally connected with YCS as well. So, in conclusion, what can I say? Albert really valued young people. To work with young people, you've got to be a good listener. And I think we can all learn from him to be good listeners, not only to young people, generally to our children, and to do that with humility. Albert was able to do that with great humility, as several people, as Leslie was saying a moment ago as well. Even though he was so learned, he never put you down. You never felt like you were an imbecile in his presence. He would argue with you if he disagreed with you, but he did it with respect and with humility. And he was always available. Even once he finished being the national chaplain, even though he was always very busy, he accompanied so many students at personal levels, at group levels, and all remember him so fondly. He was an unshockable sort of person. You could talk to him about anything, even if it was your deepest personal challenges or problems, and nothing would shock him. He didn't come with any preconceived ideas about what you should be or who you should be. And he made us all feel totally at home and free with him, with his non-judgmental approach, but yet a challenging approach. He didn't just accept what you would have seen as maybe not fully integrated. He would challenge us. And another thing about him was that he helped students to develop a confidence in doing theology. He helped us to understand that theology was not just for the experts. Anyone could do theology if you knew something about Jesus, about the gospel. In that sense, you would know something about God. And you had a point of view, you had an opinion that could be taken seriously from your experience. So he valued that experience and helped us to start doing theology ourselves. And that, I think, was one of his main contributions, especially to the student movement and to the broader theological movement. Because he was able to also make very complex concepts very simple. Everyone has spoken all the time about how Albert wrote. He was an excellent writer. He could write very simply. When people saw Jesus before Christianity and read it, it's such simple. You could read and make sense of it, even if you'd done no theology or had no other experience before. So he appreciated and stressed how anyone, even the most unlearned of persons, can start doing theology and can become a theologian in that sense. Another aspect about Albert was the fact that he was, the thing that struck me most about Albert is that he was, his sense of freedom. He was a free person, I can say. He was never afraid to raise critical questions of whoever, even authorities in the church, with anyone else that disagreed with him. But he would always be open to dialogue. He would never be afraid to challenge. But without any sense of arrogance. He had a very, very small ego. That was Albert's. He was blessed to have that. And he always respected everyone that he was talking to. Is on. Finally, I can say the thing that struck me most about Albert is his commitment. Even while he was very critical of the church, even while often he was even sanctioned by the church, and even while he had many difficulties, even with us Dominicans, I'm a Dominican, he always accepted criticisms graciously. And he never considered leaving the church, never considered leaving the Dominicans, even when the times were difficult. And this has helped many students, and me in particular, I can say, to develop a similar sort of commitment, that we are there for the long haul, and there are contradictions everywhere. And Albert would help us to understand all these contradictions. He could even acknowledge them in himself. But despite that, he had a commitment, which he even sees today, with the way in which the ANC is gone. Many people have given up on it. Albert would also be able to acknowledge the contradictions and still be able to look for the positive things in it. And so it happens at every level. So with this, all I can say is thank you, Albert. You've blessed me, you've blessed a whole generation of students, and not only students, but people beyond. But now I'm talking about the students. So thank you. You've really blessed us. We'll all be grateful to you. We will never forget you. May you rest in peace. I'm the guy.
Thank you, Brother Mike. Indeed, he didn't want to follow us. He wanted you to think with him, not to follow him. That's how we know him. Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, comrades, now our next speaker, I hope he's ready now, is Mr. Horst Kleinschmidt, the member of the Màss Democratic Movement, and also an activist who worked for many years with Albert closely. Is he available now? Go to the next speaker. If he's not available, we'll then have to move to the following speaker. The following speaker would be Miss Febe Potgieter. However, I'm told that she was unable to make it, so she sent an apology. However, her speech is recorded. So, hello? Yeah, it's recorded. So I think we should, Kanta, put her on.
It's been loaded and posted for comrades to see it.
Okay. So shall we then move on?
Yes.
To another speaker then. Okay, this is the time for contributors from the floor, because I think there's a lot of us who would have loved to say something about Albert who are not actually in the speakers program. So this is an opportunity, therefore, then to
political struggle as church activists with Ed de la Torre and other Filipino activists. So Zimbabwe was another concern of his. He was an internationalist in a very real sense. and we thank him. We really rejoice in his life, and this is a celebration of his life and his commitment. So thank you all.
Any other speaker? Thank you, Mr. John. So can we go to Lucy Cornell now?
Yes, thank you, Les.
Yes, Lucy.
Good evening, everybody, and lots of love to everybody, especially people haven't seen for a long time. And I just want to say thank you to God for a beautiful life, for the fact that he died peacefully in his sleep. And although it's sad that he's no longer with us, I'm filled with sort of a sense of blessing that he was in the world for so long, and that I had a chance to experience him personally. And I think as an activist, as a Christian activist, he made Jesus real. And it's very rare and very special to come across people who are one of the biggest contributors to faith, because in them you see the possibility of everything we're talking about. All the values, you see the possibility of a kingdom in our lifetime. And I think that's what he inspired us with. And I remember when I was working in Mayfair in the YCS office as the publications officer for YCS, they gave us a little room, him and Joe, and gave us a little room to put our printer and our computer in. And I'd often be there till very late at night, 2 or 3, and they were just lovely. And him in particular, I always see him, he's a paradox, because he was small and slight in stature, but actually he was a giant in his affection and his love, and then on a whole nother level, his intellect and his ability to make Jesus real and faith real, and to make it very urgent. And he was just a lovely person who was just sort of like another father in a way. And for a lot of us, when our parents didn't want to know what we were doing with our time and were afraid of what we were doing, he was very, very supportive. Yeah, so I just wanted to share that. And I still feel guilty if I ever have peanut butter and butter on the same bread.
Person would be, okay, let me go. Hello. My name is, hello. Yeah, my name is Saul Molobi. I joined Learn and Teach Publications in 1988, and that was when I met Albert for the first time. And in 1990, after the unbanning of liberation movements, our junior funders indicated to us that they were no longer going to fund us, since they were funding us on the basis of the ANC and other liberation movements being banned. And then they indicated to us we needed to start looking at possibilities of generating revenue. We then got together. By then it was Learn and Teach, it was Speak Magazine, Challenge, Cosas, the Shop Steward, and Upbeat Magazine. And we started collaborating with the view to transforming ourselves into semi-commercial publications. And but as we're beginning to engage, work in progress had to close down. Some stand in the Western Cape also closed down, and New Nation closed down, and Eastern Cape News Agency was also in a financial crisis. But we did succeed through the intervention and guidance of people like Albert. I was the youngest editor at the time in that group as the editor of Learn and Teach, and Albert was the oldest. But to say, maybe I should also add, being the youngest also meant that I was the less experienced. But in Albert, I found a mentor, someone who was very patient with me, young and militant as I was. He always had time to have offline discussions with me. As sometimes I was a bit impatient with all those comrades who were much older, and I thought that they were moving very slowly in trying to get us as self-sufficient as possible. And 94 came, foreign funding dried up. And when we approached the advertising industry, which wasn't transformed at the time, we found that because we were refusing on principle to accept alcohol and tobacco advertising, they then punished us by refusing us to give us the kind of responsible advertising that we were looking for. And that's why ultimately all of us had to close down. And I continued engaging with him because after the closure of Learn and Teach, I then joined Heinemann, and I saw Mr. Stewart is here, who was one of our most successful and dependable writers. And we continued engaging as I was looking at him guiding Heinemann, which was in the process of transforming after they deserted the country as part of the international isolation campaign against South Africa. And I lost contact with him until I met Leslie Dikeni. And I now regret, because for the past few weeks, we've been talking about visiting him, and I never had a chance to visit him. May his soul, fatherly, beautiful soul, rest in peace. Thank you, Mr. Molobi. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we had 4 now. I will allow only one other person to speak, if there is.
I'm here.
If not, hello? Hello?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, I hear you.
Yeah, Rapu.
Oh, Rapu. Okay, now let's allow for Rapu to come in.
Thank you very much, comrades, colleagues. I'm joining you in Vienna, Austria, and I'm as distraught as many of us to have heard of the passing of Comrade Father Albert Nolan. As a young person, I became involved in struggle as a student teacher or teacher student. I'm not sure what how to put it now, but we found Mayfair to be a haven for our what we used to call at the time emoyeni. You know, when you run away from police and have nowhere to hide in the township, we would find ourselves a place at Mayfair, and Father Albert Nolan would keep us safely there. He was a very humble person, not tiring from hearing from us, but also a very fatherly figure who would be able to call us to order, but insisting that we continue to learn and be able to engage in the townships in a very coordinated and concerted effort. I would just like to say, Lala Ngokolo, Baba, our chaplain and spiritual leader. Thank you, Leslie.
This non-Klantla. Thank you, Rapu. Yeah, I remember many of those days. Is there anyone else non-Klantla?
I don't know if I'm the only non-Klantla online. Thank you for calling my name out. I was thinking about saying a word. I am truly blessed to have met Father Albert. I met him through Father Edwin Arison, working with him as a young person in the Kairos Southern Africa movement that has worked with different Kairos movements globally. I would like to just confirm and, testify on the fact that he truly never made it awkward to be around him. As a young person who often felt intimidated being around renowned theologians, you often, it feels awkward to be around them because of the big terminologies that they use in their conversations. But being around Father Albert, for that moment that I had, it was truly profound, and he was a wonderful, wonderful father. So I am truly blessed to have met him, and I thank God for all the opportunity of learning and hearing all the new and valuable information and knowledge through him and his life. Thank you.
A father. Thank you, Atlanta. He was truly a father for all of us. And I don't think a father for the faith believing people. He was even a father for the atheists. And I hope if Mike is still listening, that he will also, like all of us should, be able to follow these footsteps. We must lift the bar now that is gone. Yeah, with those words, I think there's room for one person, and then I'm going to have to move because I think our previous speaker is still struggling. If he's not available, we'll have to move to Cecil Souls to give a vote of thanks. But is there anyone else who wants to contribute?
Yes, am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Hello?
Yeah, Peter.
Okay,
Peter.
my name is Zo.
Okay.
It's Zo.
Oh, Zo. Okay.
It's Zo.
Oh, Zo. Oh, yeah, Zo. Comrade Zo. Okay, sorry. You look. Please carry on.
Just a few comments of tribute to Father Albert Nolan. The first thing is while I concur with many people, there is something which was not touched really by anyone paying tribute. I worked with Albert in the Institute of Contextual Theology. At some stage, I was the chair. He was working there. He was also part of a theology reflection underground cell, which I was part of, that produces documents. We used to meet in Pietermaritzburg. And I remember in the first meeting, he introduced a code of conduct for members of the cell, which was to ensure that the cover is never blown. And one of the things that I still remember that code of conduct was the issue of saying that you should never, ever speak any ill about a member of the group outside of group. You have to talk to the member face by face or bring it to the group. You were not allowed to gossip or speak any ill about a member of the group outside of the group. I remember I kept a copy of that. I should be having it somewhere else. And then one of the things, if you recall, during that time, just before, we also were we cut our political teeth really in the Black consciousness movement, and we had this view that people are bad, white people terrible. They are the result because of the apartheid system. I must say that interacting with a person like Nolan, you forgot what race he belonged to. He was such a non-racist. So you forgot what color he belonged to, what race he belonged to. You were just relating with an ordinary human being for you. He was such a humble person. And what I learned from him is that he was able to do a lot from the bottom. So he never aspired for leadership, but wherever he was, he would move mountains. Albert would move mountains without taking up any leader. In actual fact, he pushed other people to take up leadership positions. And finally, I recall that we were part, I had the privilege of spending such a long time when we went on the tour of Nicaragua and Cuba. In Nicaragua, we were stuck there in the country for many days. We couldn't fly out. We came at the time when there was the regime changed there. When the Sandinistas lost the elections there. And Albert had organized that trip. And we stayed in the houses of Catholic families. And he was.
Zlo, your network is very, very poor. You are fading almost. Yeah, now we're going to have to leave you there. Sorry, colleagues. We're also running out of time now. We are beyond the time limit.
We are so committed to theologically that is going to work in the best interest of the people. As I always said that he was my mentor, but at the end, such a humble giant. Thank you.
I think I saw Benita and Tom Wasp wanting to speak. I think this is really the last one's colleague, because I think my team members are going to kill me because we are beyond the allocated time, and still there needs to be a vote of thanks. So colleagues, the two that are supposed to speak now, please be very, very brief. Benita, you can come in. Okay, Benita doesn't want to speak, so anyone else, or can I close it now? And I'm sorry, colleagues, I'm using a phone because we've got load shedding here. So I had to resort to my phone.
Can I make a very quick comment?
Yes, Tom, please.
It's me, John
I haven't
Clark.
seen you for many years.
Are you Tom or John?
Who's talking now?
John Clark. I just want to
John. Okay, carry on, John.
Okay, I just wanted to say that I started university in 1976, which was the same year that Jesus Before Christianity was published. And
it had a fundamental impact on my life, not just because of the book, but because of the man. And I've always wanted to know the person that writes a book. And I want to just share one very brief incident, is that when I was involved in the entire university in ecumenical evangelical movement. And in one of the things that we were planning, I invited Albert to come and preach to this group of evangelicals and ecumenicals on the parable of the mustard seed. And because it had been so memorable about how he talked about this small seed having incredible impact over time. And looking back 40 years later, to see all these incredible ecosystem of support has been such an incredible validation of that sermon that he gave, and also serving to break down barriers between different factions within the Christian church. And I just would not be the man I am today if it wasn't for Albert Nolan. Thank you.
I think, colleagues, that's where we're going to leave it. I mean, there's going to be other platforms where people can contribute, write. The debate and the discussion and the celebration of this giant will continue. So for now, I think I'm going to move on to our last person in the program, which is Mr. Cecil, YCS first organizer, maybe, I think, who's a comrade, a colleague, also a member of the Màss Democratic Movement, worked for many, many years under difficult conditions in the country with people like Albert and many others. Cecil, over to you.
Thank you, Chairperson. Yes, thank you, Chairperson. On behalf of the organizing committee, I would like to express our apology to those speakers that couldn't connect due to those technical challenges. Chair would like to thank the Nolan family and relatives, and also to the Archbishop for the blessings of the meeting itself, and indeed to all the speakers who eloquently articulated their life experience of Fr.Albert Nolan. That was greatly appreciated and indeed and very inspiring. To the Christian community that supported Fr.Albert Nolan unconditionally, in particular the Dominicans, who as individuals and also as an institute continue to give support to Fr.Albert Nolan until his point of retirement. To the international community, we also give thanks to all the theologians, the scholars, the institutes, and all the Christian activists who kept continuous contact with Fr.Albert Nolan and who were engaging continuously with his ideas and ensuring that his ideas become a living reality in our society. In closing, I also like to thank the members of the organizing committee that organized this event today and also that put us together on that chat group under the leadership of Jabu Ngwenya. Now, Chair, lastly, with regard to tomorrow, which is going to be the day of the funeral, the arrangements are the following: that it's going to be at Our Lady of Mercy in Springs at 12 noon. I thank you.
Good evening to everyone. Thank you. Good evening. Good night to everyone. Go
Leslie,
well.
before we close,
you are tired now. You will be
Leslie,
working again tomorrow. And as I said, you must leave the bar.
Before we close, can we invite everyone to turn on the camera so we can see who we're talking to?
I don't even know how to do that. I'm on at least, even if I don't know how to do it. Yeah.
It would be lovely to see all you people we haven't seen for decades.
Hi.
Hi.
Mike. Bye-bye.
Leslie, vela pinche bemhlophe.
Yes, how are you?
I'm fine, and how are you? Hey, Tshediso, Comrade Drapu.
Bishop.
Bafana. I'm doing
Hey, Tshediso. How are you?
Good, good, man. So nice to see everyone.
Hey,
Bafana, how are you? Hey, Bafana.
Marylin, I need your number. I'll get it from Cecil.
Hey, Peter, how are you?
Hi.
It's Stephen, Leslie. Hi.
Bye.
I can see you, Peter.
And God bless.
Yeah, man, it must be cool. Don't be like Rap, who is a diplomat now. I mean, they're boring, these diplomats. Be cool. Yeah. Albert was cool. You must be cool too. Yeah, that's it.
Everyone has so little hair left.
Think for yourself.
I think you mean the men, Mark.
I did say the men.
Yeah.
Goodbye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
I'm still a smoker. I want to go and smoke a cigarette now. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.
Come on, see, good to see you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you very much.
Emilia, why